This is the Rational Reminder Podcast, a weekly reality check on sensible investing and financial decision-making for Canadians. We are hosted by me, Benjamin Felix, and Cameron Passmore. So today on the show, we had Ellen Roseman as our guest, and she's a journalist who's been writing about personal finance and consumer issues in Canada for many, many years. She talked about some of that when we were doing the episode. There was a lot of stuff that she's been involved with. To me, it was mind-blowing because it's just been stuff that I've taken for granted because it's been there ever since I've been in this industry. But stuff like the RIF, like she was involved with creating the RIF. The RIF didn't used to exist. You had to buy an annuity from an insurance company. I was like, what? And she was involved with the consumer advocacy to get that changed. So anyway, she had a whole bunch of interesting stuff like that. That was pretty neat to hear.
Yeah, and by being a journalist with the Toronto Star, she has a pretty large audience and is able to mobilize people around these issues, which is a really fascinating story. I've been aware of her work for years, but it was really interesting to hear the impact that she has had and the mission she's been on ever since she went to McGill.
She teaches a course at U of T and another one at Ryerson now, she told us. But she's teaching courses on investing for beginners, and she's been doing that for years as well. We had a comment on YouTube recently when we had our Jamie Purvis episode out, and someone said that they really hope that we get more sort of technical product experts on and less personal finance type experts and journalists. I thought that was interesting, but the thing that made me think about was you can be a technical expert in product like Jamie Purvis was, but when you get someone like Ellen Roseman who's teaching a course on investing to hundreds of people a year, you get a whole different level of expertise where you know exactly how consumers are thinking and exactly what Canadian consumers are going through and how they're making decisions. And it's not technical, but it's a whole other level of expertise.
Well, she clearly has her finger on the pulse of investors in Canada in terms of the feedback she gets. She gets lots of consumer complaints, and she talked about that when she talks to real people and listens to their real issues. And often it's not about the nuanced stuff going on inside an ETF or a factor fund or who knows what.
Yeah. Anyway, so we'll let you listen to the episode, but it was a good conversation.
Ellen, welcome to the Rational Reminder Podcast.
Thanks, Cameron.
So happy to have you join us. I've followed your work for many years and appreciate all that you've done for so long. And our first question for you is, on your website, you refer to yourself as an advocate for consumer rights. So can you tell us, what does that mean to you?
I went to university in the late 60s and I wrote for the McGill Daily. That was my journalism training. And when I graduated, I remember going to an interview where I was trying to figure out what to do next. I got a master's in philosophy, which came after that. But then, I had to find a job. And somebody said, who do you admire most? And I said, Ralph Nader. That was the peak of his, rusty cars and Pintos exploding and that kind of thing. And I fell back on the journalism, even though I didn't have a degree. I got into business journalism. And then I discovered the consumer movement when it was still quite active in Canada. All the governments had active, ministers giving money to consumer groups, and there was a consumers association. And over the years, I covered a lot of causes that then became reality. And I was just looking back on some of them. So the first one, I guess, was the fact that when your RSP matured at age 71, or maybe it was 69, the government changed it a couple of times, there was no other alternative but putting it into an annuity with a life insurance company. So you handed it all over to them and they doled it out for the rest of your life at whatever the prevailing interest rate was. And a guy in Barrie called Tom Delaney, who sold insurance, thought, we need more choice. And he started leading marches, and I covered him. And the eventual result, not me, because he got some coverage, but I think I was one of the early people, was that we now have the Registered Retirement Income Fund, which is self-directed and which you can invest whichever way you like. Now some people are saying annuities have a bad rap. Maybe you should have half a RIF and half an annuity, but that was a big deal. There was the TFSA. There were some papers published by a guy called Richard Shillington, an academic in Ottawa, who said that the RSP wasn't good because the income that people got once they were retired, but if they had a low income earlier, RSP income would take away from their government benefits, such as the Guaranteed Income Supplement or drug benefit plan. And he said there had to be an alternative. And eventually we got the tax-free savings account. The home buyers plan under the RSP, I wrote a lot about that. Once the government started giving money for the RSP, the Canada Education Savings Grant, there was a big campaign to try and offer the same thing for low-income people. So that was the Canada Learning Bond. And then there was another piece where we had to publicize the Canada Learning Bond because a lot of people didn't know about it. and group scholarship plans. There's a whole bunch of things. And a lot of it is it's not only helping people who are aware and already able to enforce their rights or their skills as a consumer. It's helping those who have little knowledge or awareness as consumers and often don't have the ability to get benefits that they should be getting. And working at the Toronto Star is a great place because that's all about trying to create more social justice.
So you were able to galvanize support for these various causes?
Well, helping, I don't read all the newspapers across Canada, but they were certainly things that I wrote about quite a lot.
That's fascinating. Those are all things, the things that you mentioned are all things that I take for granted because they've always been there as long as I've been thinking about this stuff. Are there any big things like that you're fighting for now or that you're writing about now?
The most recent one, I guess, was the expiry of reward points just because they've been around for a certain amount of time. And you being financial guys, you understand that these companies don't like having liabilities on their books for too long because they don't know what it's ultimately going to cost. So that was their argument. And consumers bought it for a while. They didn't like it. But then Air Miles, which is owned by an American company, they said 5 years ahead that they were going to expire all the points after 5 years. And then when the 5 years started to get close, they stopped communicating. They were just not telling anybody. They were hoping, I guess, through attrition that they'd all be gone. So there was a role for the media to get in there and tell people better use those points before you lose them. And then I started a change.org petition and pushed that. Usually as journalists, I don't do this kind of thing, but it really bothered me and got, a few thousand signatures. And another blogger, Rob Engen, who also writes for the Toronto Star, Boomer and Echo is his blog, he started fighting it. And we got such a buzz out there that an Ontario MPP, who also was starting to get some complaints from his people, put forward a private member's bill, and Ontario threatened legislation to outlaw the expiry of points for no other reason than it's been a certain amount of time that they've been on the books. And just the threat of that caused Air Miles to back right down, and the whole thing was lifted about a month before it was set to expire.
Fascinating. That's really interesting to hear the on-the-ground perspective of those types of things changing.
It was really exciting. I had been asked to go to CBC and talk on Facebook Live to the host of Marketplace about this. We didn't know that the company was about to change its policy. It put out a very abrupt press release, and it did it while we were in the middle of our interview. So somebody rushed in with the paper, and we were both stunned. So it got all a reaction. It was really fun.
Wow. That's neat. Your most recent book, which was 2013, right?
Yes.
And that was called Fight Back, 81 Ways to Help You Save Money and Protect Yourself from Corporate Trickery. So there were 81 tips in there, I guess. Can you give us the top three, your favorite three?
Yes. The first one, and it probably is the most popular because everyone has a phone and internet and TV, and they have a plan, usually with one of the top three telecom providers. If you want to pay less, call and ask to pay less. And I spoke to an expert who says, I call it creative whining 101. As simple as it sounds, if you want to pay less for phone or TV or internet, call your provider and say, before I make a move to a less expensive supplier, I'd like to be sure I'm getting the best deal possible on my services. And if you're polite and courteous and you ask them, my advice is always to say, how long have I been with you anyway? Because they've got the records. And sometimes you're surprised. When I asked Rogers, it said 1979. And then usually the answer after that is, I wasn't even born then. But they recognize that loyalty, and they know that if they start losing loyal customers, that isn't a good thing because the new customers that they attract will be gone as soon as the benefits are gone and they find a cheaper deal somewhere else. So you can usually get pushed up to the next level, which is called loyalty or retention, and they'll try and keep you. And if that doesn't happen on that call, just hang up and try again and see if it'll happen that time. Usually it works.
Well, when I called Rogers for my own service, the guy said kind of off the cuff, you should call us every year and do this, right? So I made a note in my calendar to call back every year on the anniversary to do exactly what you're suggesting.
That's great advice because a lot of people are doing that. And the ones who are missing out are the people who are either intimidated, hate bargaining, or just don't know, or are older, but the younger savvy consumers, they'll probably do it every 6 months, maybe even every 3 months. Okay, so the second one is when you travel, make sure that all your travel documents are in order. I get so many stories about people who, and I've seen it in my family, where they forget that their passport has expired or is just about to expire because you often can't travel even if your passport is valid if it's within 2 months or 3 months of expiry. Make sure that it's not damaged. At one point, Air Canada was refusing everyone who had some water damage on their passport, saying that that wasn't workable. Make sure you have the right visa. Some companies require visas. There was somebody who lost a giant trip because they were going to Thailand, I think, and nobody told them that Thailand needed a visa. And so they went to the airline, they went to the travel agency, they went to their travel insurance. Nobody would cover it. Make sure that you have the health insurance. If you have it from work, have the information about the provider written down, have the card, make sure that if something happens, it's easy to access. And if you buy travel insurance, make sure it's the right kind and it covers what you need to cover. Somebody just got in touch with me from Greece. She was there with her elderly father. He had bought travel insurance. He told them he had a heart condition. It was a pre-existing condition. He paid more. He had a heart attack in Greece. Number one, the family couldn't get a hold of the broker or the travel insurance provider. It was very hard to reach them. And number two, the broker actually said, I don't want to tell the travel insurance company because if they hear that I'm making a claim, they might not want to sell me any more travel insurance. Crazy stuff. And eventually we did get through, but they're still waiting to hear. And then I checked with another broker who specializes in this stuff, and he said that he bought a policy that requires your condition to be stable for 180 days. That's like 6 months. And he said that's a very stiff condition if you have a heart problem. It means that you can't change your medication, stop, start, any of that stuff, have a test even. And he's thinking, if only somebody had helped them buy the travel insurance, they might have bought a better policy. Okay, and the third one is how to fight back when a store refuses to give you a refund. This is so common both with physical stores and online stores. They're now making it really tough to get refunds. I'll mention a company that was a real stock market darling for a while, Dollarama. They don't give refunds or exchanges or returns. They put it on the screen of the cash register as you're going out, but that's about all the notice that you get. And it's on the bill, but you've already paid for it. And the managers, because it's not a franchise, it's a company-owned operation, don't have much latitude in terms of giving refunds. And okay, well, if you change your mind, if you have buyer's remorse, that's one thing. Stores are allowed to maintain a no refund policy. But if you buy something that doesn't work, and it's obvious right away that it doesn't work, a light bulb, a battery. Somebody told me once that her husband was a chef and he bought a measuring cup. And he took it home and he realized the measurements weren't right. So a lot of this stuff comes from China. Maybe it doesn't always work that well. And when Dollarama's managers or store staff say, sorry, no refunds, that's the end of it. So I started looking online. Every other cheap store has their policy online. Dollarama doesn't. I go to their website. There's nothing there about refund policy, nothing, no returns or anything. Then I hear from some clients that they wrote to the head office, and once they got in touch with the head office, they were sent a $10 gift card in the mail, a Dollarama gift card. And when I spoke to their PR person, they said, well, yes, we do that, but nobody was telling them. And remember, too, that to get this gift card, you had to snap a photo of your product, you had to snap a photo of the receipt and send it electronically to the head office. Not every dollar store customer has the ability to do that. So I just didn't like this whole policy. And some companies like Amazon, especially if they have Amazon Prime, you can send it, you can probably send it back, no big issue. But a lot of stores are now saying things like, don't bother us if your machine doesn't work, go to the manufacturer and you'll be covered under the warranty. Not always the case, and you can't get a refund. So I think that stores are making it tough, and they're not telling people their legal rights under the Sale of Goods Act that you're supposed to have something that works for the purpose for which it was intended.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. Not something that I've thought much about, but makes a lot of sense.
You teach some continuing education at U of T, right?
Yes.
So I'm curious, how do you teach people on as far as investing goes, on the active versus passive decision?
My class is called Investing for Beginners. I've been doing it for over 10 years. And at the beginning, it was more about, mutual funds are too expensive. That was the part where everybody started to realize that, the heavy cost of the MER, 2.5% a year, was taking away from their returns that they were paying through the MER for advice that they maybe weren't getting from the seller, the intermediary. And then the advice was more like, go on to Morningstar, go on to Fund Library, look for the best funds and the lowest cost funds. Then it was read the fund facts documents, which started to come in. But the ETF came later. And sure, the banks had their own index mutual funds, but they were higher priced. And once the ETFs started coming in, then it became easy to tell people there's an alternative. You don't have to get the lowest cost mutual fund, but you can get an even lower cost product that matches the market that you're interested in. Then you had the Canadian Couch Potato blog, and you could follow that advice. But since then, it's become easier even, but more complicated too, because there's so many options. So you can put together, you can do the robo-advisor route, which is convenient, but costs a little more, but they rebalance for you. And then now they have the low-cost all-in-one ETFs. So Vanguard, BMO, and BlackRock all have these really low-cost balanced ETFs. So all you need is one product that can do all the work for you. So it's become a lot easier, but for the average person who doesn't think much about investing, and if they do think it's hard and complicated and full of math, when you give them too many options, their brain starts to go like, what do I do now? And sometimes you have paralysis.
How do you teach that? Your answer to that question leads perfectly into the next question, which is, with all this choice, even though there are a bunch of really easy ways to invest in index funds, how do you teach people to think about when they should seek advice versus try and do things on their own?
I talk a lot about the fact that, number one, that they are paying for advice when they have mutual funds. The sellers are often pretty good at disguising it because it's in the fund facts document, but they're not necessarily telling you that they're getting this trailing commission every year to pay for advice. I always think of it as like going to a restaurant and finding out that there's a built-in gratuity of 15, maybe 18% a year, and you have no choice. So at least in a restaurant, it's usually disclosed to you in advance, so you can demand good service. But for mutual fund people, they don't know what they're paying, so they don't demand the service that they should be getting. And often they're content with a once-a-year phone call to find out if they're putting money into their RSP. So that kind of advice isn't that useful. And a lot of the people who take my course are fed up with their mutual funds because they're not growing. They feel that they're not getting anywhere with their retirement plans. And when you ask them about the service, they feel that there isn't much there. So I talk about maybe you need a more holistic kind of advice. Maybe go to a financial planner that can look at your cash flow, your insurance, your estate planning, your taxes, and give you advice about all those things. Not cheap, mind you. A lot of people don't like to pay the full cost of financial planning, but I'm not always a fan of throwing the financial plan in for free as long as you buy products from the company that you're dealing with. And on our podcast that I do with Lana Sanichar of Canadian Money Saver, it's the Money Saver podcast, we interviewed Rona Birnbaum, who's a full service financial planner and fund seller. And she started an online financial plan, kind of like a robo financial plan called Viva Plan. And they charge $799, which is bringing the cost down and making it more affordable for people to get that kind of advice.
Speaking of advice, Ellen, you must get a ton of complaints about bad investment advice.
Yes, probably the biggest complaint, and I think it's universal because I see it all the time, are people always asking about, is leveraging a good strategy? And I think the average public doesn't really know or care about it until their friendly mutual fund seller comes along. Usually they're licensed only to sell mutual funds. And the big tactic is always to say, if you've paid off part of your house, you don't even need a paid up mortgage, but that's a benefit. But even if you've paid up part of the house, that equity sitting in the house is dead equity. It's doing you no good at all. It's just sitting there useless. Why not take it out and buy mutual funds and hold them over a number of years? And eventually the mutual funds will far surpass the cost of the interest that you've paid, and you'll be all set. Now, I'm not saying that leveraging is a bad strategy. Sophisticated investors have made a lot of money with going into debt, but for the average investors who are approached by these people, it's very difficult for them because when times are good, they don't mind paying the interest. When times are bad, they're distressed seeing their funds go down, and they're even more distressed paying interest on the loan to buy funds that are going down, and they feel that the downturn is never going to end, so they sell out at the bottom. So it's really not fair that so many of these sellers are, and some of the companies that are out there, use a leverage up pitch with whoever they're dealing with. It's just kind of like the modus operandi. Everybody is told to do this or asked to do this, and it's up to the client to say yes or no. And unless you've done it, you don't realize how scary it is to go through a downturn with your funds and your your investment loan. So that's the worst, I think. But there's a lot of other ones too. There's a lot of like, this is complicated. I'll just give you, the very, very basic idea of what you're doing. Remember principal protected notes? That was just like a GIC. It was just like a GIC. Only when the market crashed in 2008 did people find out that the principal protection was detached from the stock market investment because they couldn't do it that way. And they had to hold on for 10 years, even though they were getting GIC-like returns. So, there's such a role for the media to be able to tell people what those other guys aren't telling you, the downside, the potential downside or the risks, because every seller is always looking at the bright side, the most optimistic scenario. So I hope through the media, people are getting to read the other scenario that might really trap them.
I want to come back to your continuing education course for a second. When you're teaching that, how many cohorts do you go through a year? Like how many people are you teaching?
The fall course gets an average of about 50 people, and they're all ages and all stages. Some are quite young too. It's really nice to see. I had a high school student once do it. And I work with another U of T instructor to do an all-day course. So we try and condense it all into a weekend, either a Saturday or a Sunday for 8 hours, and give them a lot of information. We're now thinking that maybe because last time somebody walked out at noon and she said, my head is swimming, too much information, maybe we'll do it half a day on the weekend for 2 days in a row. But people know that they need this information, and it's really nice to see them. And because this other instructor and I are both women, we get a fair number of women. The last time around, we had 16 people, all were women. It was the first time ever that we had an entirely female audience, which we don't, market for or solicit. I think every woman in Canada is realizing, you can't leave it to the male in your life. You're likely to outlive them, and your approach might be different from your partner's approach. So why not? Some of the women who take the course are saying, well, we've always been dealing with this investment advisor that my husband picked, but I'm not so comfortable. So I want to figure out what I'm going to do and find my own advisor.
So is the result of that you end up creating better clients for advisors, or do they become do-it-yourselfers, or do they go to robos? Like, what is the end solution that you see them walking away with?
It's hard because we don't keep track of them after. We hear from them off and on. Some of them do it themselves, but that's fairly complicated. I always think that it's only hard at the beginning, like opening up that discount brokerage account. It takes a lot of time. There's all these documents that you have to sign, and it's pretty... And once you start trying to pick things and you push the button and you're executing an order, that's scary. But once you get used to it, I do it myself, and it all becomes routine after a while. But there's the do-it-yourself route, which is probably a minority. There's some people who come want to stay with their advisors, but they want to ask their advisors better questions. So this is a great outcome. They're not going to let their advisors get away with, I have it all in hand. Don't worry, the market always goes up. We now know about all those conversations where the advisors are so arrogant by watching those Questrade commercials on TV going on for years. And you can see, how the client feels sometimes when the advisor tries to brush them off. And then there's the third one where people will go to the robo. And that's the easiest. And we actually stress that. If somebody's a beginner, doesn't have time, feels that they are wasting a lot of their precious years by investing in low interest products, go to the robo. It's simple. It's convenient. You can't go wrong. There's 15 to choose from. Probably they'll get consolidated at some point. Probably the banks are going to take over a few. They already are looking, I think, and a couple of banks have started their own. So that's the best route. And if all we do is just explain what a robo-advisor does and how they can benefit from it, that's the first step. And maybe after that, they'll move on to something more complicated.
Interesting. Can you pinpoint, you're delivering this course to a ton of people, and it sounds like they're all pretty engaged. Is there a common light bulb that goes off? Is there one topic where everyone's like, oh, now I get that?
There certainly is, and it takes a while to talk about how mutual funds get you in the end. First of all, there's the deferred sales charge. I'm now teaching a course at the Ryerson Life Institute to older adults, and I was doing the investing piece yesterday, and also had Larry Bates, who's written a book called Beat the Banks, and he spoke to them. And so I showed them the typical DSC schedule over 7 years, and you can see how it starts at 5.5%, and it goes down ever so slowly, and it just takes forever to get to the end of it, and they're taking a big chunk of your proceeds. And How many people hold on to their mutual funds for 7 years? Some do, some don't. Often the advisors are the ones that churn them, or that they keep giving them new funds during that period so that they start the DSC schedule all over again. And this was never a consumer-friendly measure. And then at the end of it, you tell the students the securities regulators in Canada had agreed, which takes forever, that they would get rid of the DSC as not a consumer-friendly measure. And then Ontario, under their new PC government, decided to throw a wrench in the works and saying, we're not going along with it. We like the status quo. So luckily, the DSC seems to be dying out. But as I pointed out, Investors Group, which was the king of the DSC sellers, they got rid of it 2 years ago, but everyone else who has their funds from before January 2017, they're still paying those DSCs, and they're not retroactive.
Based on the data that we have from, I think, who publishes it? Morningstar publishes the data on where are Canadian fund assets, and they're still mostly in actively managed mutual funds. Is that what you see from the sample that you get of your students? Are they mostly in actively managed mutual funds?
Yes, though it's gotten so complicated that people rarely know what they have. Even the names aren't so well known. Templeton used to be a well-known name, but they're not as prominent as they used to be. So people know that they have funds. Sometimes they're bank funds. So it's the brand name they don't know, the type of fund they don't know. And then you get into things like, is it the A or the B or the C? There's so many different initials that they can't even go online and look to see, which fund they have and whether or not Morningstar gives it 4 stars or 3 stars or 5 stars, because they don't know which kind they have. So it's complicated, but I think that what people know is that they have a relationship with someone who they've probably been dealing with for quite a while, usually in the fall or in the spring, when the RSP season happens, maybe during the tax season. Then they forget about it for 6 months and then they come back again. And as long as that relationship seems to be pretty good, and as long as they're getting some regular mailings about their investments, then it's fine. They don't know really how to compare their returns. The regulator said, okay, let's do some kind of a requirement every year that they get a dollars and cents summary of what they're paying the advisor and a performance, their individual performance, not the fund performance. So it's on a statement that they get once a year. But how many people read the statements? I heard from a bunch of people, including one who works in the industry, that he just puts it in a drawer and leaves it there all year and then takes it out once a year and puts them all together. So it's not the most happy thing that people do is reading statements, and maybe the statements aren't as well designed as they could be.
So you are co-chair, I believe, of FAIR Canada, correct?
Yes.
And that is the Foundation for the Advancement of Investor Rights. Can you talk about what FAIR would mean to our listeners and what you're hoping to achieve?
FAIR was founded by Ermanno Pescudo, who used to be head of the Ontario Securities Commission, and he felt that whenever the securities regulators wanted to consult the public about whether the rules needed changing, that they would put out a call for submissions, and 99.9% of the submissions were from the industry, written by lawyers, fairly technical, and there might be 0.1% from consumers, and they were often a consumer who got into a bad deal with an advisor and was complaining about that. He felt that there was a role for an advocacy group that would speak for the investing public as a whole and would be financed by the industry or by the regulators from the fine money that they collect, because in Canada you can't use that fine money that you get from companies to finance your operations as a regulator, because that's seen as a conflict of interest. So it started with money from the regulators, and lately we've had some money from IROC and also from Stephen Jaroslawski's foundation. He's a member of our board and he's a longtime portfolio manager. And we've been making submissions to the regulators for a number of years. Some have gone through, such as, the Fund Facts document and CRM2, but others are stalled. The best interest standard, which is like the fiduciary duty, the regulators have backed off. They want to use more targeted reforms. And then the embedded commissions, which is, the trailing commissions that are paid by the managers to the people who sell the funds. We see that as a conflict of interest, and we've said it many times, but that again seems stalled. So now we're rethinking, because so much of the work has gone to try and persuade the regulators, and we're not getting that far with it. We're trying to go more public, like CBC Go Public, and really tell investors that we're there to help them, we want to get their support and do more that is pitched at the investor's level of knowledge, because our submissions also tend to be quite technical.
What do you think the impact of a best interest standard would be?
I know that there are some issues because, for example, I was talking about the people who are licensed to sell mutual funds by the MFDA. If they had a best interest standard, would they have to tell the customer, all I sell are mutual funds, so if you want to buy and sell stocks or individual bonds, I can't sell them to you, and that may not be in your best interest. Maybe you should go down the street if that's what you really want. Right now, they'll just say, who wants to buy individual stocks and bonds? You're not diversified. It's not good for you. We're much better because we're diversifying you and we have professional managers. And they leave the impression often with people that a mutual fund will protect you from market downturns, which is far from the case. So it could really derail the industry as it's currently constituted. But here's the thing. Most investors in Canada, there have been many, many surveys, believe that anyone who is selling them financial products, usually aimed at retirement or at meeting their life goals, have a legal duty to put the client's interests ahead of the advisor's interests. And they're very surprised when told, no, that's not the case, except for a few categories of clients that are, profoundly unable to fight for themselves, and there's an imbalance of power. But if you're an average person, you're supposed to be responsible for making your own decisions. And even if you're misled by the advisor, that's your fault. People don't like hearing that. And we have to address that gap, because if they get turned off by a bad experience, they're probably never going to come back in. And it means eventually that the federal government is not involved in securities regulation. It's left to the provinces. The federal government is the one that pays out the old age security and is responsible for Canada Pension Plan. And if they find out later that a new generation of retirees does not have financial security because of the way these mutual funds are sold to people and the returns aren't there, they're going to have to worry about, maybe we have to make it fairer for the individual consumer to get the advice that they need.
So interesting. So, Ellen, I have to ask you about your recent, I don't know if it was a war or not, but recent events on Twitter where you were blocked by some pretty high-profile, famous personal finance people, namely Suze Orman and Dave Ramsey. So they blocked you on Twitter. Can you talk about that and what caused it? And you seem to get a whole lot of support, I noticed, in the Twitter feed afterwards around this.
It was so much fun. I'd never had such an exciting time on Twitter. It actually started because I get A Wealth of Common Sense, that blog from the US, and he'd written an article about Suze Orman and about the fact that it started about a guy called Stephen A. Smith from ESPN and how he earned so much money. And he was saying that when you earn a stratospheric level of income, millions and millions, and then you become divorced from the average person because you're always traveling on a private plane and you're getting whisked away to the famous hotels and you're never standing in line and your life is so different. And then he brought that down to the level of Suze Orman and Dave Ramsey, who are both like superstars of personal finance in the US. Suze Orman is more or less retired, but she still comes in from time to time. She retired from TV anyway. And Dave Ramsey is still very active out there with a radio show. So I just retweeted it. And when I retweet, I usually put a little comment on top. I can't forget what my comment was. I can't remember what my comment was, but I'm not sure if it's Suze Orman or Suze Orman's assistants or Suze Orman's robots that all of a sudden blocked me. And I didn't realize it until I went to retweet it again, and then I saw that it had disappeared, and just this sign saying I was blocked. So I took a picture of the sign and I put it on again. And oh yes, before she blocked me, she retweeted it and said, "Worst comment ever." So that was pretty exciting, right? Blocking and retweeting at the same time. And then I did a few other tweets, and then all of a sudden, because I'd started with a U.S. guy who worked for Barry Ritholtz, we were starting to get other people from the firm because they'd written some of these comments as well. And then I did a Dave Ramsey thing. And it took me a while to figure out that he'd blocked me too, because he had Dave Ramsey's show, which didn't block me. And, he had a few different Twitter handles. But then I noticed that the Dave Ramsey one was also blocked. So I took a picture of that. And then I did a moment, my first ever Twitter moment with all the info. And as a result, I think I had 9,000 Twitter followers, and I went up to 10,000 within a few days. So all very exciting and kind of fun to see all these people from the US taking interest and and supporting. And, a lot of people feel that maybe that kind of advice. And then it kind of devolved to that whole question of, if you're a personal finance guru and you have nothing more to say about 401ks and REITs and all that kind of stuff, why not just attack the daily coffee and start telling people if they just gave up that latte, the latte factor. David Bach has reissued the latte factor, but at least he acknowledges that it's not only coffee, it's just sort of looking at our bad habits. But many of them, including our Kevin O'Leary in Canada, who now is Mr. Wonderful in the US, always attack that coffee. And I believe that giving up coffee is not enough to make you a millionaire in retirement. You have to do a lot more than that. And it's such a simplistic thing to say, give up your coffee.
We talked about that on one of our recent episodes, about that exact comment from Suze Orman. Now, Suze Orman has 1.4 million followers on Twitter. Dave Ramsey has 900,000. You have 10,000. What do you think that says about where people are getting their financial advice?
Well, broadcast is the best way to get followers because you're in people's living rooms. They see you. Suze Orman hasn't been on TV maybe for 6 or 7 years, but people remember her. She was on Saturday night. She had this segment that I remember called, Can You Afford It? And people would call in and they'd say, I want to buy a boat. How much is the boat? Oh, $20,000. And she'd say, girlfriend, you're denied. And then there was this big kind of alarm about, so that kind of stuff is really simple. People loved it. And Dave Ramsey has a radio show. I haven't heard the radio show. I don't know if they carry it in Canada, but people know him very well. And he's got a variety of things going. I recently did a thing about my column in the Star about timeshare ownership. And the timeshare resellers are profiting because people can't sell that timeshare once they buy it after a presentation where they're given almost no information and pushed to sign a contract. So the timeshare resellers are predatory, and they know that customers are anxious to get out, and they promise them everything and sign them up, and they lose more money. And one of them was endorsed by Dave Ramsey. So it made me realize how many tentacles he has out there.
Well, Dave Ramsey is a big proponent of actively managed mutual funds.
Okay.
That's a big part of his whole story.
Yes. I certainly remember when I started writing about it in the Star, Mackenzie Financial, which was then riding high. I think it was before they were taken over. The fellow who ran it said, an ETF is guaranteed mediocrity. And we believe that we can always beat the market. We have the best possible fund managers in Canada, and we're always going to do better than an index product. And today you look at them, they've got their whole suite of index products, just like most of the other fund managers.
I remember that well as well, Ellen. So I have one last question for you. And this has been a really fascinating journey through kind of the financial system in Canada. And I appreciate all that you've done for all these years. And many of these things I didn't know how involved you were. So I appreciate that. And I'm curious, given that, how do you define success?
I define success in how many people I can reach and hear back from them. Well, thank you. You opened my eyes to this. Thank you. I didn't realize this. Like yesterday, a number of people said, I got to get in touch with my mutual fund company. Maybe I can move it. And then there were a lot of questions about how do I move it? And is it hard to move it? We were answering all that. So maybe a call to action for some people. And then in the Star, in the last few years, I've been doing a lot more on trying to open the doors for people to reach big companies with their problems. And when I get them to the right level of the company and the problem is a real one that's totally not being addressed by the lower level call centers and staff, I can get them their money back or get them whatever it is that they're trying to get from the company. So that's incredibly rewarding. And that's one reason I continue to do the column, even though I'm not working full time for the Star anymore, because it's so hard for the average person to reach large companies. And with FAIR, it's so hard for the average person to take an investment complaint to a company and expect the company to do anything about it. So it's always like an imbalance. And if some problems are resolved, there's always new ones coming along. The use of technology now allows new problems that we haven't really addressed before. So it's a never-ending fight. It's never going to be finished. But at least we can see some progress along the way.
Well, the advocacy is appreciated by many consumers, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. It was fun to talk.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you.